The desert was still dark when the first tank burned. No warning, no loud battle cry. Just a sudden flash on the horizon, a sharp crack of a gun, and then the low orange glow of fire rising from the sand. It was October 1942, just before dawn, near El Alamein in Egypt. The air felt cold and heavy. Men stood behind their guns, hands shaking, eyes fixed on the empty black distance ahead. Somewhere out there, engines were moving, metal tracks grinding slowly over hard sand.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.
You could feel it before you could hear it. And then, at 5:15 in the morning, the ground began to tremble. The German attack had started. The men holding the line that morning were not part of a massive armored force. They did not have rows of tanks behind them. They had just 19 anti-tank guns, dug into shallow positions along a narrow defensive sector. They were British and Commonwealth gunners, many from the Royal Artillery, and supporting units of the 9th Australian Division. Their orders were simple and frightening at the same time. Hold the line, do not fall back, no matter what came toward them. Ahead of them, advancing through the dim light, were tanks of the German Afrika Korps, Panzer III and Panzer IV machines moving in formation, supported by motorized infantry. The attack was part of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's effort to break through Allied defenses before they could fully launch their own offensive. Time was running out for him. Fuel was short. Supplies were limited. But his army still had skill, discipline, and experience. And when German armor moved in the desert, it usually broke through. The first gun fired at 5:19. A 6-pounder anti-tank gun, positioned low behind a sand ridge, kicked backward in the sand as its crew watched the shells strike the front of a Panzer III. The tank slowed, then stopped, smoke leaking from its engine compartment. Seconds later, another gun fired, then another. 19 guns, spread across a thin line, began shooting almost at once, each crew working fast, loading, aiming, firing again before the dust cleared. The German tanks did not stop. They kept coming, closing the distance, firing their own main guns. Shells slammed into the sand, throwing dirt and fragments into the air. One British position disappeared in a blast, the crew thrown backward. Another gun was hit directly, its barrel twisted, its men lying still beside it. But the rest kept firing. You can almost feel the tension in those minutes, the smell of hot metal, dust in the throat, the sharp sound of shells passing overhead. No one knew how long they could hold. They only knew they had to. At El Alamein, the ground mattered as much as the men. The battlefield was narrow, squeezed between the Mediterranean coast and the Qattara Depression. There was no room for wide flanking moves. Every advance had to push straight through defended positions. That meant anti-tank guns were the key. Whoever controlled the ground and placed their guns well could stop armor, even if they had fewer tanks. The sector defended by those 19 guns was part of a wider defensive network prepared by General Bernard Montgomery's 8th Army. Montgomery had taken command in August 1942, determined to stop Rommel's advance once and for all. He focused on building strong defensive belts, minefields, and gun positions. He wanted the Germans to attack prepared ground, to lose strength, and then be pushed back. Rommel, however, was known for attacking first. Even when short on fuel and supplies, he believed speed and pressure could break an enemy before they were ready. In late October, he ordered probing attacks across several sectors to test the Allied lines. One of those thrusts came directly toward the gun positions held by the Royal Artillery that morning. The German formation advancing toward them included elements of the 15th Panzer Division. Experienced crews, men who had fought across North Africa for 2 years. They knew how to handle anti-tank fire. Tanks moved in short bursts, halting, firing, then advancing again. Infantry followed behind, ready to clear gun positions once they were reached. But the Allied gunners were ready. Their positions had been carefully prepared. Guns were dug low, barrels just above sand level. Range markers were set. Fields of fire were planned in advance. Every gun crew knew exactly which sector they covered. At 5:27, the second wave of German tanks pushed closer, now within 800 meters. The British guns opened again. A Panzer IV took a direct hit to its turret ring and burst into flames. Another lost its track and spun sideways. German return fire intensified. One gun crew was wiped out when a shell struck their ammunition pile. Another position lost its commander, Sergeant Thomas Wilkes, who had been directing fire from behind the shield. Still, the line held. The fight was not a single moment. It stretched across nearly 2 hours of constant pressure. German armor kept attempting to push forward. Each time they advanced, the 19 guns fired again, shifting aim, engaging new targets. Communication between crews was limited. Much of the coordination came from instinct and training. Each team watched the ground, the movement, the distance. By 6:10, the desert was fully lit by the rising sun. Smoke from burning tanks drifted across the battlefield. The sound of engines was mixed with explosions and shouted commands. German infantry began trying to move around the flanks, using shallow dips in the ground for cover. Machine gun teams from supporting Allied units opened fire, forcing them back. The numbers were starting to show. One by one, German tanks were knocked out. Some burned, some were abandoned. Others tried to reverse, only to be hit from another angle. At 6:35, a German counter push formed, this time with tighter formation and more aggressive movement. They aimed directly at a gap between two gun positions, hoping to break through before the crews could shift fire. For a moment it almost worked. 2 Panzers pushed past the first line, firing into the rear area. Trucks and supply carriers were hit. One ammunition vehicle exploded, sending a shockwave through the defensive line. But the gunners reacted fast. 2 of the remaining guns swung around, firing at close range. One Panzer was hit at less than 200 meters. The second tried to turn but was struck in the side armor and stopped. The fight continued. Shell after shell, fire after fire. By 7 o'clock, the German assault had lost momentum. Smoke covered much of the battlefield. Burning vehicles marked where earlier attacks had stalled. The 19 guns, many damaged and some silent, were still there. Crews were exhausted. Ammunition was running low. But they had not broken. Reports later counted the damage. 52 German tanks had been destroyed or disabled during the engagement. The number shocked many who heard it. 19 guns against a major armored push, and they had stopped it. This stand was not just about numbers. It changed the flow of that sector. The failed German attack weakened their armored strength at a critical moment. Rommel needed mobility and pressure to hold his line. Losing that many tanks meant fewer options, fewer chances to strike. And within days, the Allies launched their own major offensive. The Second Battle of El Alamein began in full force on October 23, 1942. Artillery, infantry, and armor pushed forward across prepared lanes in the minefields. The German army, already stretched and now missing valuable tanks, struggled to respond. The gunners who held that line did not know they were part of something larger. They only saw what was in front of them. Tanks coming closer. Friends falling beside them. Orders shouted over the noise. You can imagine standing there, hands gripping cold metal, waiting for the next shape to appear through the smoke. Every second feeling longer than the last. The men came from different places. Britain, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. Some were veterans of earlier desert fights. Others had arrived only months before. Their training had been intense. Anti-tank work required precision, patience, and courage. Crews had to hold their fire until the right moment. Too early, and the shot might bounce. Too late, and the tank would fire first. Sergeant James Harwood, one of the surviving gun commanders, later described the moment when the first tanks came into range. He remembered the silence before the first shot, the feeling that everything depended on timing. He waited until the lead Panzer crossed a marked point in the sand. Then he gave the order, "Fire." That discipline was what made the stand possible. The guns themselves were key. The British 6-pounder anti-tank gun was smaller than some German tank guns, but it was accurate and capable of penetrating armor at close and medium ranges. Positioned well and used with care, it could stop a Panzer. Positioning mattered more than raw power. Crews used the desert terrain to hide their silhouettes. Sand ridges, shallow trenches, even wrecked vehicles provided cover. When the guns fired, they often shifted slightly, making it harder for enemy gunners to target them. The German tank crews were not inexperienced. They reacted quickly, firing back, attempting flanking moves, using infantry support. But the narrow ground and the prepared defensive line made it difficult to break through. Rommel himself was not present at that exact moment. He had been in Europe for medical treatment and returned shortly after the battle intensified, but his officers understood his approach. Attack hard, find the weak point, push through. This time, there was no weak point. The stand by those 19 guns became part of a larger story of El Alamein, a turning point in the North African campaign. After years of back-and-forth fighting, this was where the momentum shifted clearly. By early November, the German and Italian forces were retreating westward. Fuel shortages, equipment losses, and constant pressure forced them to pull back across Libya. The myth of unstoppable Afrika Korps momentum began to fade. Yet this specific stand, this moment where 19 guns stopped 52 tanks, remained less known. Overshadowed by larger offensives, bigger troop movements, and famous commanders. But on the ground, for the men who fought there, it was unforgettable. The desert remembers everything. Burn marks in the sand, shrapnel buried just beneath the surface, tracks that fade slowly under wind and time. When historians later examined the reports, they saw how crucial that engagement was, not just for the tanks destroyed, but for the delay it caused. The German push was meant to test and weaken the Allied line before a larger move. Instead, it cost them strength. And that mattered days later when Allied forces advanced. Each missing tank meant less resistance. Each lost crew meant fewer experienced men. War often turns on moments like that. Small units holding ground. Decisions made under pressure. Seconds that change the direction of an entire campaign. You can almost picture the battlefield after the firing stopped, the smoke drifting, the quiet returning slowly. Crews stepping out from behind their guns, looking across the ground at the wrecked tanks. Some still burning, some silent. There was no cheering, just relief and exhaustion. Medics moved among the positions. Ammunition carriers arrived. Orders came through the radio. Prepare for further action. Stay alert. Because the war was not over, not even close. El Alamein would continue for weeks. Attacks, counterattacks, artillery barrages day and night. But that morning remained a clear example of what discipline and preparation could achieve. Field Marshal Montgomery later emphasized the importance of anti-tank defenses in desert warfare. Tanks could dominate open ground, but only if the enemy lacked proper guns and positioning. The stand by those 19 guns proved that even a limited force, if well placed, could stop a major armored push. It also showed the cost. Many of the gun crews did not survive. Positions hit early never recovered. Others fought on with fewer men, loading and firing faster than training ever expected. Every gun had a story, every crew a set of faces, names, memories. Corporal Alan Reeves, a loader on one of the guns, wrote later about the sound of incoming shells, a whistling that seemed to grow louder just before impact. He remembered ducking instinctively, then rising again to push another shell into the breach. No time to think, only action. Lieutenant Peter Harding, who coordinated part of the line, described watching German tanks approach through binoculars. He could see commanders standing half-exposed from their turrets, directing movement. He knew they were professionals, skilled and determined. That made the task even harder. And still, the guns fired. History often focuses on large movements, armies advancing, cities falling, leaders giving orders. But the reality of war is built from moments like this, small groups holding ground, decisions made in seconds, courage shown quietly. The 19 guns at El Alamein did not win the war alone, but they helped shape a battle that changed its direction. By late 1942, the Axis position in North Africa was collapsing. Allied forces pushed west. American troops landed in Morocco and Algeria during Operation Torch. The pressure from both sides forced German and Italian forces into retreat. The road back began there, in the desert, where a line of guns refused to move. You can almost feel the sun rising higher that morning, the heat replacing the cold, the sand warming under boots, the battle shifting from survival to recovery, men cleaning their guns, replacing damaged parts, writing quick notes to families when time allowed. They did not think of themselves as part of history. They were soldiers doing what they were trained to do. But decades later, when records were studied and stories collected, that stand stood out. 19 guns, 52 tanks, a line that did not break. It became a reminder that preparation, discipline, and courage can change outcomes even against stronger forces. And in the quiet desert, long after the war ended, the ground still held the traces. Fragments of metal, faded trenches, the memory of engines and gunfire carried away by the wind. The forgotten stand that helped break Rommel's momentum did not happen in a famous city or a massive armored clash. It happened in a narrow strip of desert at dawn when a handful of gun crews faced a wave of tanks and refused to give ground. That is where the story truly lives. Not just in numbers, but in moments. The first shot at 5:19, the smoke rising, the line holding, the silence that followed. And if you stand there in your mind, watching the horizon as those men did, you can almost feel the weight of it. The fear, the determination, the knowledge that everything depended on holding just a little longer. Because sometimes history turns not with a roar, but with 19 guns firing into the morning light.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.